Not too long ago, I decided to make a video detailing all of my issues with Breath of the Wild. And, well, it didn't get received that well. But I'm okay with that, because at the beginning of the video I said that I do enjoy the game and that there are a lot of great things about it. That video in particular was simply to talk about my issues with the game. It just so happened that I had a lot of issues with it, and I didn't want to be like everybody else who's made videos about Breath of the Wild and just simply sucked its dick and said it was the best game ever, because while it is good, it's not the best game ever. Either way, I did want to talk about something that Breath of the Wild got near perfect, and that is its tutorial. Now, a traditional video game tutorial consists of a bunch of menu pop-ups telling you how to play the game, where to go, and beginning the story. Zelda games in general have always done tutorials better than most games, but I think that Breath of the Wild has the best. So, let's go take a look at some of the past Zelda tutorials for comparison's sake. Legend of Zelda for the NES. You put in your name, you press start, and, well, off you go. The informed player will go into the cave at the top of the screen, grab the sword from the old man, and then begin making their way to Dungeon 1. It's simplistic, it works. But unfortunately, this is a time before traditional game design had been established, so this tutorial, quote unquote, while simplistic, also has its issues. For starters, a brand new player, especially a younger player, can end up completely missing the cave, causing them to walk around aimlessly until they die, because, well, you kind of need that sword to make any progress, unless you're doing some kind of challenge run like a madman. Now, once they eventually die, they'll be taken back to the first screen, so it's not really that big of a deal because they will get the chance to grab the sword again. The beauty, however, of the original Legend of Zelda is that it's not handholdy at all. It's your adventure and you can go about it any way you like. Yes, there's a general progression that you'll want to take. You usually want to beat all 8 dungeons in order, get the better 2 swords halfway between certain dungeons, and continue to pick up items like the red candle and bombs, but overall, it's your decision where to go, and that's what's so great about it. What we'll see about Breath of the Wild is that it takes this notion of freedom in an open world and makes it even better in its tutorial level, but we'll talk about that soon enough. Now, let's take a look at the first 3D Zelda game, Ocarina of Time. Now personally, I'm not the biggest fan of this game. I understand that it's an important piece of video game history, and I can appreciate it for what it is, but it's nowhere close to being one of my favorites. What I do like about Ocarina of Time is its tutorial level. After you're awakened by Navi, an annoying fairy, you're free to roam the entirety of Kokiri Forest. Now, this village isn't large whatsoever, and we'll see that a future game in the franchise, Twilight Princess, did this part a little bit better, but regardless, Kokiri Forest works well for Ocarina of Time. You can go inside a bunch of different buildings, get some rupees, and eventually you'll try to leave the forest, but you'll be stopped by Mido, who's blocking your path. He gives you your first quest. You won't be allowed to leave until you find a sword and a shield. Now, this is a bit annoying and ridiculous, but games of this era use this kind of trope to keep you from entering the rest of the game without having the equipment you needed to stay alive. It'd be like if the original Legend of Zelda wouldn't let you go left, right, up, or down until you go into the cave and grab the sword. It makes the world smaller, yes, but it was necessary for this game, especially considering this is one of the first 3D games out there. We'll see how Breath of the Wild does something very similar to this, but in a much better, natural way. So, after being stopped by Mido, you'll grab 40 rupees and then you can buy a shield from the shop. You can then find the sword through a small fenced-in area called the Forest Training Center. Here you step up to a hole, press A to crawl in, and you'll find a gigantic chest with the Kokiri sword inside of it. Now you're able to leave. This could technically be considered the end of the tutorial level, but you're still only limited to a small part of the game at this point. After you leave past Mido, you're introduced to the Great Deku Tree, which becomes your first dungeon. I actually really like this dungeon. It's simple, which allows you to figure out how to maneuver and fight enemies in a 3D space. There's also some basic puzzles here, and you can get a few different items, the main one being the slingshot, which comes in handy later. You fight your first boss, a gigantic spider, who's super easy, and now you get to leave the Kokiri Forest and start on your quest to Hyrule Field. I'd argue that this is really the end of the tutorial area in Ocarina of Time, so let's go take a look at Twilight Princess now, who in many regards is a better version of Ocarina of Time. Twilight Princess admittedly is my favorite Zelda game. It was also one of my first. Its tutorial is, in my opinion, not as good as Ocarina of Time's though. Even though Ocarina of Time is not my favorite game, I do like the way that it kind of goes straight to the point with its tutorial. Twilight Princess it's very long. If you know what you're doing, you can probably get through it in about 30 minutes, but if you don't, it could take you upwards of an hour or more. You could also argue that there's a second tutorial, but I'll get into that in a bit. While I like Twilight Princess's opening, it's anything but perfect. You start out with a cutscene and then you get to talk to Ilia, one of Link's love interests, who also just so happens to help take care of your horse, Epona. Here you get Epona, your horse. You can explore Ordon Village, and now it's time to do the quintessential Zelda task, herd goats. It's a minigame, and yeah, I guess it serves as a tutorial to get used to controlling Epona, but other than that, it's not really that important. After the goat herding, it's time to go back to Ordon Village, where you'll use an eagle to get a baby's cradle from a monkey, so that you can get a fishing rod, so that you can go fishing for a nearby cat, which makes the cat go back home to the shop, where the cat's owner will now give you an empty bottle, and finally allow you to buy a slingshot. In other words, it's a fetch quest. The tutorial, it's a fetch quest, which is kind of annoying, considering in the original Legend of Zelda, you get a sword and it's off to the action. And in Ocarina of Time, you can also get a sword pretty quickly and it's off to the action. At this point, all you've gotten is a slingshot. After you get the slingshot, you can now train with it because some kids want you to. And finally, after you kill a spider that's on your house, you can open up a chest to reveal a wooden sword. And you get another tutorial, this time to show you how to use the sword. And that's technically the end of the tutorial of the game. You can finally start entering the world to save a kid and some monkeys, herd more goats for some reason, and then you get captured and turned into a wolf. And this is where I would argue is the opening of the second tutorial, the wolf section, but I'm not going to go into that. All in all, Twilight Princess's tutorial isn't bad. It's not bad. It's just overly long and obnoxious at times. It teaches you all the basics of the game, but at what cost? For the impatient player, they might get bored way before they're able to enter the first dungeon, which, by the way, is a couple of hours into the game. So, you know, I don't think the tutorial's for everybody, and I'm glad to say that Breath of the Wild definitely does this a whole lot better. The next 3D game in the Zelda series is Skyward Sword, which I've played a bit of, but not enough to really go into depth about its tutorial. At the end of the day, it has a similar problem to Twilight Princess, just on a bigger scale. It's too long and too hand-holdy. What's nice is the development team learned with Breath of the Wild's tutorial, which I now get to fully talk about. Breath of the Wild is a massive game. It's got a lot going for it, and while it isn't my favorite Zelda game, I'd be remiss to say that the game is bad. It's not bad by any means. I did say that the open world is mediocre, but for the tutorial area, it is far from that. You start the game awakening in the Shrine of Resurrection, and then you get a very beautiful scene of the Great Plateau, which is the tutorial area. Here you're free to roam about, much like the original Legend of Zelda. But what's nice is, unlike the original Zelda, you have a clear objective in the Great Plateau. That objective is to leave the Great Plateau. It's pretty simply, actually. What's nice here is you can stay here as long as you want. It's a great area to get accustomed to the combat mechanics, stock up on basic weapons and items, and even fight some pretty cool enemies. Accompanied with the sandboxy feel of the game, there's a lot you can do here. It's why the first 20 hours of this game is one of my favorite video game experiences of all time. While you can do whatever you want here, you will eventually want to get out of this place. So, you find this old man, reminiscent of the old man in the original Zelda. He'll tell you a bit about the plateau and Hyrule, and then point you in the direction of the Temple of Time. After a while, you'll hear a voice that belongs to Zelda, telling you to make your way to a certain location on the map. Once you get over there, you'll fight a couple of enemies, place your Sheikah Slate, which you got back in the Shrine of Resurrection, and then up comes a gigantic tower. Here, the old man will come back, tell you more backstory to the game, and then offer to give you a paraglider. But first, you have to go get a treasure from a shrine. What's interesting here is that you can't leave the plateau until you get the paraglider, which honestly can be somewhat irritating when you hear that the game is completely open world, but once you take a step back and realize how great this opening area is, and how necessary it is to defeat it, it makes complete sense. Because, let's say you could leave the plateau without the paraglider. Well, you can't really do a whole lot in the world without the paraglider, first off, And you also can't do a whole lot in the world without your 4 main runes or Sheikah Slate powers. It's these abilities that allow you to conquer the rest of the game, and since you don't just get them for doing nothing, you do have to find the 4 shrines, solve the puzzles, go to the Temple of Time, meet the old man once more, and there he will give you the paraglider. Now you can roam the rest of Hyrule. By setting up a clear enough path for the player to travel, Breath of the Wild manages to allow the player to get lost in the Great Plateau while also wondering what lies beyond it. At the end of the day, the amount of work you have to do to get the paraglider, it isn't too much at all. It could be compared to something like the Fetch Quest tutorial from Twilight Princess, but I'd argue that that comparison is very loosely because in Twilight Princess, all you get when you leave Ordon Village is a fishing rod, which you don't really need to ever use again, a wooden sword, which you end up having to get again as Wolf Link, a bottle, which you don't really need to use again, and a slingshot, which you won't be able to actually use for a while because of the wolf section. Meanwhile, in Breath of the Wild, you get all 4 of your Sheikah Slate rooms, which are used to complete any and all puzzles out in the main world, shrines, and dungeons. You get some weapons and items that can be used throughout the game, a paraglider which helps you travel the game better, and you even get an additional full heart container or an addition to your stamina wheel. So while yes, technically Breath of the Wild has a fetch quest for its tutorial, it's a lot more streamlined than Twilight Princess and it actually amounts to something. Breath of the Wild is an enigma. The Legend of Zelda series has been around since 1986 and it continues to evolve and bring new ideas to the players. While Breath of the Wild tried to be a great open world game, I'd still argue that it comes up short in many ways. However, for everything that the game lacks, it still manages to have yet another thing that's absolutely breathtaking. As we look towards the future of the Legend of Zelda franchise, I hope that one of the Zelda developers are making an even better open world experience, that every other developer looks at what Breath of the Wild did for its tutorial and learns from that. Thank you everybody so much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you still don't hate me from the last Breath of the Wild video. I still agree with everything I said in that video. I'm not backpedaling. That was my thoughts. And if you don't like it, well then, oh well. In the meantime, I have plenty of other videos coming out really soon. More things about video games, more things about movies, TV shows. I'm doing live streams on here now. Decided to basically ditch the gaming channel from now. Just gonna do live streams on here on Twitch. So hopefully you guys will enjoy that. And in the meantime, I'm gonna go to bed. It's midnight and I have work in the morning. So thank you for watching. And until next time, hope you guys have a great day. Bye bye.